Question. This is an extremely interesting video, specifically when you say the outer mind is very limited. I feel like this other realm is what's tapped into during meditation. When you speak of beings, are you legitimately referencing them as physical manifestations that anyone can see, or something only your own mind can see while meditating? If I'm not mistaken, isn't this essentially what we peel back in Buddhism when they mention the development of insight? So there's more to the question, but I'm just going to stop here and comment on this. What I've talked about in several of my videos, including some of my non-duality videos, is that when you start to awaken from identification with form, with your with the matter world, you basically step outside your own mind. And as I've explained in many videos, the mind has the 4 levels: the purely physical, the emotional, mental, and identity level. And it is in these 4 levels that our outer personality is created. And it's created in relation to this world, to the physical matter world here on Earth. And most people on Earth are completely identified with the contents of their outer minds. But when you start to awaken, you start disidentifying from the contents. You start realizing that you are not the contents of your mind, you're more than this. And the reason that this can happen is that the core of our being is what I call the conscious you, which is simply a neutral state of awareness, where you're just observing, you don't have any value judgments, you don't have any opinions, interests, biases, you're just observing. And this conscious you is an extension of your higher self. And the higher self exists in the spiritual realm. And when you start disidentifying from the contents of your mind, the 4 levels of the mind, or the 3 levels in the physical body, you start connecting to your higher self, and you start shifting your identity from the outer things in this world to realizing you are a spiritual being. You are actually the higher self. But then when you have that connection to a higher self, you can also have a connection to beings in a higher realm. I call them ascended masters. They have over time been called other things. It's really just a name. But the important aspect here is to grasp is there are beings that are real. They exist in a higher realm. They existed before this matter world because they were actually the ones who created it. And we are actually extensions of these beings. Your conscious you is an extension of your higher self, but your higher self is an extension of ascended masters. And this chain of being goes all the way up to the ultimate being in our world of form, which I call the Creator. And so the beings in the spiritual realm are not physical beings. They exist in a higher level of vibration that your physical senses cannot detect, because the physical senses are designed to detect the vibrations, the energies that make up the material frequency spectrum. It's comparable to, if you take it visually, we have the spectrum of visible light that goes from red to violet. Below it are infrared, above it are ultraviolet. There are many other vibrations. But our eyes are calibrated to see only the physical spectrum. So it can happen that an ascended master takes on not really a physical body, but a physical appearance, I would say. But it's rare. What most of the time happens is that somebody, their conscious you, goes outside of the physical body and the 3 levels of the mind and experiences an ascended master directly, not through the physical senses. But it can seem as if that appearance is physical. In the beginning, when people have these encounters with ascended masters, it can seem as if it's physical. It can really seem like you are physically seeing this master. And as you become more used to this, it's no longer important to have a visual image of a master or any other physical related appearance. You just tune into their consciousness and you just experience their being, which is really the way to experience them. because that's the more direct way. It doesn't go through the senses, or it is not even through the physical senses, but the imagery that we have in the mind because of, for example, the visual sense. So many times when people encounter an ascended master, that master appears as a human-like figure. They don't go around in the spiritual realm having human bodies, of course. But in order to make it easier for us to relate to them, they can take on this appearance that we, in our minds, we perceive as a human-like appearance, as a human body. And then when we get more used to it, more familiar with them, we go beyond this level. We don't need to have them appear in some physical appearance. We just tune into their presence. Whether that is exactly what they mean in Buddhism, I don't know enough about Buddhism to evaluate that. But I would think when you talk about the development of insight, that can be two things. It can be that you have more of a deeper understanding of certain concepts, but also you have a direct experience of a realm beyond the material. So I would think it's very parallel. Then the question goes on, I have also thought that most non-dual teachers, especially the Western variety, are full of shit. This is why many mystics have these types of teachings locked up and require transmission for those that are ready for the teacher to appear to them. Ascended masters to me, well, let me comment on that. I've said many times that we have the outer mind, the 4 levels of the outer mind, and most people are identified with that. But the core of our being is the conscious you, which is completely neutral. It's not. It hasn't become the outer mind. The conscious you creates the outer mind in order to relate to this world, but it doesn't become it. And so when you start awakening, you actually start realizing, I am not the contents of my outer mind. First thing you realize, usually, I'm not my physical body. But you eventually come to realize, I'm not actually the contents of my outer mind. And as the person says, most non-dual teachers, especially the non-dual variety, are full of, because what they're full of is the interpretations created in the 3 levels of the mind that they superimpose upon the mystical experience. So they have a genuine mystical experience, but they are superimposing an interpretation on it, instead of using the mystical experience to question the contents of the mind and completely disidentify from those contents. That's the real purpose of a mystical experience, to give you a frame of reference. There's something outside the contents of your mind that is more real than what the mind produces internally. And so there can be some teachers that are very, very attached to a particular interpretation of the mystical experience or the non-dual philosophy. And they then want their students to accept this. It's as if they're programming their students with a certain view of the mystical experience, so that when the students have a mystical experience, as soon as they come out of it, they are superimposing the teacher's interpretation on it. For example, non-self. I've said before in my video about the nonsense of non-self, you cannot have an experience that there is no self, because then you're not having an experience. If there is no self, if there's no experiencer, there cannot be an experience. So you cannot be in a physical body on earth and say, I've attained non-self. I have no self. You may not have a separate self, but you have a sense of self. That's the conscious you, that has a certain focal point from where it experiences the world. Now, there is another aspect of this when you're talking about transmission, is that in the Eastern tradition, you have the Guru tradition in India, for example, where it's said that the Guru has achieved a higher state of consciousness. And by personally interacting with the Guru, the student can open his or her mind for a direct transmission of whatever you call it, energy, spiritual light, consciousness, from the teacher. And I'm not I'm not really denying that this can happen, but I do think that what the teacher does is not so much transmit something, but open the student's mind to receiving it directly from his or her higher self or from the Ascended Masters. So I think the Indian Guru tradition is way too focused on the importance of the physical teacher and not so much on the ascended teachers. Which, you think about this. In the model that I'm giving, for example, in a video about how the world was created, right? I'm saying there are the 4 levels of the material realm, beyond that it's the spiritual realm. But everything was created out of the spiritual realm. The energies, the consciousness of the spiritual realm. It was created by the beings in the spiritual realm. So all energy, all transmission comes from them. So you have to be very careful with the Indian Guru tradition of not thinking that, oh, this Guru has attained some higher state of consciousness all on his own, and he now has this energy he can transmit to me. No. If the Guru has attained a genuinely higher state of consciousness, he has connected to the spiritual realm and is receiving energy from the spiritual realm that might flow through the Guru to the student, but it is ultimately coming from the spiritual realm. And if the Guru doesn't recognize that, he is most likely not a genuine Guru. Then finally, Ascended Masters, to me, after watching this video and reading some articles, is simply our own mind interacting in a higher state in one of the 4 realms you mentioned. You sit long enough and it's all just a mirror for what reality actually is, and that's where we wake up. Well, yeah, the only thing I would say is that when you're talking about Ascended Masters, you're not talking about beings in the 4 realms. There's the physical, emotional, mental identity realm. There are levels of vibration. There are beings in those realms. We are the self-aware beings in the physical realm, but there are beings in the higher realms as well. And people have over time connected to them. But what I'm talking about with Ascended Masters is beings in the spiritual realm that you connect to when the conscious you goes outside the 4 lower bodies and disidentifies to some degree from the contents of those 4 lower bodies. So, but it's very true that when you become more neutral, you can go into a higher state of mind and you can your mind starts interacting with the Ascended Masters. And it's important to realize that this is an interactive process. So you can receive impulses from the Ascended Masters, but they come through your mind. So you have to be careful not to superimpose the contents of your mind upon what's coming from the Ascended Masters. So most people, when they're new to this, when they first start to connect, they will have a lot of beliefs they haven't let go of, that they're still identified with, and they superimpose that. And I have seen people get into some really difficult situations by thinking that the Ascended Masters had validated some of their egotistical beliefs and desires. So it's really an interactive process where you gradually purify yourself more and more, because you realize that the value of Ascended Masters is that they are completely outside your mind. They are not colored at all by your ego. And you're using them as a frame of reference to question your ego-centered beliefs and let go of them until you become more and more neutral. And that's when you really have a more clear experience. It's true, as the person says, you sit long enough, or I would say you monitor yourself long enough, you observe yourself long enough, and you realize that all the situations you encounter are just a mirror to you because they show you something unresolved in your psychology. And as you work through what is unresolved in your psychology, you gain a more and more clear vision, and you experience, you experience reality as it is, meaning you don't have the dualistic overlay of the separate self, the ego. You don't have the value judgment. You're just observing. You're the silent vision. You're just you're silent witness. You're just observing the world without superimposing these dualistic, egoic beliefs on it. And that's the state of neutrality you come to, or personal Christhood, or Buddha consciousness, enlightenment, awakening, whatever you want to call it. But it's really when you are completely neutral and you have transcended these beliefs in the outer minds, you're not identified with them anymore.